Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of the History of Jeet Kune. I'm your host, Vincent Benitez. I am a Junfun Jeet Kune instructor under Sifu Richard Torres. And speaking of Sifu Richard Torres, he's my guest on the podcast. You may know him as a Junfun Jeet Kune instructor under the late Ted Wong. And Sifu is also an elite Bruce Lee historian and a highly respected Bruce Lee memorabilia collector. Also, today's guest is James Bishop, the author of the newly released book, Who Wrote the Tao, the literary source book for the Tao of Jeet Kune. He is the executive director of the nonprofit Passionate Mind Institute. He's a writer, licensed psychotherapist, and educational psychologist. He's one of the leading authorities in the world of philosophies and writings of Bruce Lee. He authored books such as Remembering Bruce, The Enduring Legacy of the Martial Arts Superstar, and Bruce Lee's Dynamic Becoming. Today, we're going to talk about James's book, Who Wrote the Tao? So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Ready?
Yep.
Okay, guys, welcome. All right, let's start. I've been wanting to do this for a while, ever since James put out his book. So let's just start with the questions.
Right, first show the book.
Oh yeah, right here. There we go. Very interesting book. Very interesting book, James.
Thank you.
So let me start the questions. I'm actually going to ask both of you questions since number one, because of Sifu, I actually knew the real truth about the Tao Jeet Kune, but we'll get into that later. So first off with Sifu, the first time that you heard about Bruce Lee.
Oh, the first time I heard about Bruce Lee?
Yeah.
Back in 1966.
Yep.
I wasn't even born yet. No, I wasn't. But back then, he was doing the Green Hornet. Yeah, as Kato. In fact, I think when the Green Hornet finished, the next time we saw him he did the Ironside thing, but I didn't see that. Next time I saw him was in Longstreet. And at that time, we never called him Bruce Lee. We called him Kato. That was 1971, I believe, Longstreet was. And I was still a big fan of Kato, especially since I was doing martial arts. I mean, he was the reason I started doing karate, even though I didn't know what he was doing was kung fu. And then in Longstreet, I recorded the whole Longstreet episode on cassette.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's how big of a fan I was. and played it over and over again to listen to him talking about martial arts, you know.
Right. What about you, James?
I couldn't tell you when I became aware of him. Obviously, when I was a kid, I knew of his existence. When he became a prominent person in my life, would be when the movie Dragon the Bruce Lee Story came out.
Really? Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So did you watch any of Bruce Lee's movies before that, or was just?
I don't know that I had. I think I have a recollection. I may have watched some really crappy, it might have been the Bruce Lee, the Legend or something like that.
Oh boy.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember there was a scene where, he gets in a fight at maybe it was at his lover's house or something like that.
It must be like one of those BruceLee exploitation type of movies.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
With Benitez in it, yeah.
I can't even recall. It just was something on TV when I was a kid.
Now, was that the Saturday morning kung fu movies, or was it in the theater?
No, I didn't go to see one.
Because few people realize that there was two periods with the kung fu genre, and the first genre was, for us guys that grew up around it in the 1970s, is going to the movies every Saturday and seeing Five Fingers of Death and seeing everything that came out on that had to do with kung fu, not just Bruce Lee. And every Saturday there was a new movie out. The Chinese Godfather, Chinese Hercules, everything that kung fu this, kung fu that. And then it stopped. And then years later, it got revived again because it was being shown in New York's Channel 5, which is WPIX. I think it's PIX.
I think that's channel.
NEW.
Okay.
right? WNEW, and they would show, and they had what they call the Kung Fu Theater,
Nice.
and I think that's where a lot of the people grew up with seeing that in the television, which might be what you saw, James.
Right.
Yeah. And that was the second revival. Yeah. But then, we all talk about, dragging the Bruce Lee story, how we weren't too happy with it, but it had a lot to do with having Bruce Lee being recognized, like you said, James.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even though it wasn't as authentic as we wish it would be, it still caught your interest about Bruce Lee.
Right. It didn't attempt to be authentic. But what it did was show me a type of person that I had not seen before. This person that was so obsessed with self-development and had this positive attitude. And that lit a fire in me. I went to see that at a movie theater with a girl that I had taken on a date, and we got out of it, and I was just electrified. And I said, I'm going to find out everything I can about this man. Mm-hmm. And she was rolling her eyes, going, and I told her, I said, I'm going to become an expert. And she was rolling her eyes, going, oh yeah, I've been to action movies with guys before.
Right.
This is just another
James,
fleeting moment, but it turned out not to be the case.
Now, James, since you know who Bruce Lee is, or at that time after the Bruce Lee story, what is your favorite Bruce Lee movie?
Oh boy, probably Way of the Dragon.
Way of the Dragon. Can I ask why?
Because that was more authentically Bruce Lee. It was his idea. He directed it, and of course, it had that classic Chuck Norris fight scene in it.
Of course.
Although I have to say, Fist of Fury was good as well. My understanding with those kung fu films is that they really weren't working from a script. They were making it up as they went along. So Fist of Fury impresses me because it's very cohesive, if in fact that's true. And they were just kind of ad-libbing it their way through it.
What I find interesting about the Fist of Fury is that obviously Bruce Lee's martial arts ability is his acting ability. He was truly going off the deep end, hence the Fist of Fury, trying to find his teacher or whoever killed his teacher. And every scene, it was just like he was just going crazy. And people don't even think about that. But there are scenes where he's talking to, his girlfriend, his brothers and everything. And it's just you can see the intensity, especially when Bruce was trying to get himself recognized as an actor. Fist of Fury embodies him being a little bit crazy, but also furious with his fist and his agenda to see who killed his teacher, which I found really fascinating about that.
Yeah. Actually, you see the interview by the two men that were actually Japanese that played Suzuki and Suzuki's assistant. Mm-hmm. When they were interviewed, just like James was saying, Bruce was playing it ad-libbing, it says, okay, in this part, I'm just going to come at you with chucks and you just do this and do that. The guy's going, what is he talking about? And suddenly camera is on and here's Bruce going at him and he has to react to him. And so, they really were doing it scene by scene. In fact, a little trivia about that movie, they said that when they went to the set, they couldn't believe that the Chinese guys that were playing Japanese karate guys had hakama, the bottom skirt, backwards, They had the part that goes to the back and the front belly there. And so if you ever look at the movie, look at that and you'll see. And so they said, why are they wearing that backwards? They didn't know because they were Chinese, obviously, playing Japanese.
Okay. So next question, guys. The first time that you heard about the Tao of Jeet Kune. So let me pose that question first to James.
Well, obviously, since my introduction was dragging the Bruce Lee story, I was introduced to it when it appeared in the movie, how Bruce Lee wonderfully wrote this book while he was convalescing.
And Linda was writing it as he was
which we now see as one big advertisement for the book in the middle of the movie.
And what happened with the book, James?
Oh,
it sold out.
Skyrocketed in sales. Yeah.
Sold out. Wow. They couldn't keep up with it in printing.
That was the first time ever, myself too, when I watched the Dragon the Bruce Lee story, that I heard about the Tao Jeet Kune. And like what James said too, I thought that's how he was writing it. And I was like, well, this was approved by Linda Lee. And I was like, okay, maybe this is some sort of the truth. He's lying in bed, he's upside down, he's writing, he's telling Linda to write this and all this other stuff. And I was like, wow, he actually thought about all this and wrote everything. And obviously that's not the case. So what about you, Sifu? When did you first hear about the Tao?
Well, I was already into karate at that time. So I was buying Black Belt magazine. That had to be in the early 70s. And O'Hara Publications, which owns Black Belt magazine, they started advertising the book, as we see in James's book here. He puts all the advertisements there, which is great. And when I saw that advertisement, I was blown away because I already saw him in Longstreet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've seen it, all three of his movies came out already. Yeah. Because this was the book came out in 1975. I think it started shipping in October of 1975. Probably ordered the book in the beginning of 1975, early 1975. It went for $6.95.
Wow, $6.
Yeah, I asked my mom to write a check to Harold. We took the magazine, which she should never do. You cut the little application with the scissors.
Wow.
And write down, and sent it away, and I would check that mailbox every day to see if it was coming in.
Nice.
And actually, in anticipation of the book, I asked my mom to get me a desk, a lamp, and I got myself a ruler, paper, pencil, and pen. I was ready for the book. It just, believe me, when I opened up the mailbox and I was pretty angry at the mailman because he folded the book.
Oh, no.
Like it was a soft cover, He put it in because I don't know if you're in New York City, the mail is different than in private homes.
Next question. When you first got the Tao, what did you think about it? So I'll pose this question to Sifu first.
Oh, I couldn't put it down. I started reading it. And of course, the philosophy part was just way over my head at that time,
Right.
But I'm skimming through it and I couldn't believe what I was looking at.
What about you, James? What did you think about it when you got the Tao?
Oh, I about the same reaction he did. I was mesmerized by the book, and particularly the philosophy sections for me were the ones that fascinated me the most.
Yeah, it's funny that you were intrigued with the philosophy, and I was intrigued with the martial arts. But here we are with looking at the same book.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you know this, James, but the first time I ever saw you or heard of you was at the Nucleus meeting when you won the contest for writing something about Bruce Lee and his philosophy. And I think you wrote something about him being the Gnostic, I think, Gnostic.
Oh, you're talking about, I did this article on the parallels between Bruce Lee's philosophy and Gnostic Christianity, and not just the parallels, but I've also kind of delved into how, both Jesus and Bruce died at an early age and had these disciples who, went on to, I think there's a lot of fascinating parallels. And I think you can look at the way Bruce Lee and his art and his students kind of went off after his death. And it reveals some insights probably about early Christianity as well.
Yeah, how you had different branches of the Christianity too.
Some people thought I was crazy for making those parallels, but
but you won, right? You won the contest, right, from the Nucleus.
Well, I won that I did an essay on the subject of totality from Bruce Lee's philosophy. That's what I won.
Now, James, that article, is that available to read? Because I would love to read that article.
Yeah, it's in it was in Bruce Lee magazine, but it's also available in my book, Dynamic Becoming.
Okay, so when you obviously read the Tao, you got everything that you needed to get out of it. You have favorite passages and everything. What did you not like about the Tao?
Oh, wow. I don't know that there was anything that I didn't like about the Tao. Okay. I don't think that I had any complaints.
So what did you learn from the Tao?
Two things primarily I learned from it. Fluidity and constant development, which like he said, I came from a karate background. So everything was stop and block, punch, or, it didn't flow the way that Bruce described that it should be flowing.
Okay. What about you, Sifu?
Obviously, the physical part was with the martial arts, and then the philosophical part was to always question everything and not accept everything for what it is, and see if there's a deeper meaning.
That's very interesting, because when I first read the Tao and when I started martial arts, I actually started martial arts late. When I was 26, and it was long fist kung fu. And when I got the Tao, I'm reading it, and I actually thought that it was a how-to book, because I'm flipping all through it. They have like diagrams, drawings. I'm like, okay, maybe if I read page by page, I'll learn how to do this, I'll learn to do that. And I just couldn't grasp the concept of, at that time, what Jeet Kune was. So I'm like, all right. So I just put it in my book and just left it for the dust to, gather up on top of the pages or whatever.
If there's one initial criticism you can make about the Tao of Jeet Kune is that issue, that it would be a much more effective book. It's like a textbook, and when you're getting an education, usually the textbook works in concert with the tutelage that you're receiving, right? So you've got someone to kind of talk about the concepts you're reading in the textbook and kind of work them out intellectually. And so many people, they buy this and they're siloed as they read it, and they don't have, that sort of instruction to kind of make sense of the book.
Right. And I was thinking that even though I was taking Longfist at that time, I was trying to, like what you said, I was trying to put the experiences or whatever I was learning in that school and trying to see if I could find the same similarities in the Tao Jeet Kune Do. And unfortunately, it was actually when I started to really get it just a little bit, Bruce was talking about being non-traditional. And then I'm always thinking, what does non-traditional mean? And then I'm thinking maybe he's talking about the art that he was developing was just like a freestyle type of art. And whatever I was learning at the time was more of a rigid, you have to do this by the steps. If you don't, then it's not that martial arts that you're studying. Anyway. Okay, so now let's get into your book, James. So why come out with Who Wrote the Tao now? Why come out with the book now?
Well, I just got tired of sitting all.
Before you ask him that, James, I want to ask you a question. When did you realize that what was written in the Tao was coming from other sources?
Well, I can tell you when I realized that there was a problem with all the writings attributed to Bruce Lee. I was in a used bookstore in Denton, Texas, and I was going through the Eastern philosophy section of their bookstore. And this was probably around somewhere between 2000 and 2002. And I came across Alan Watts's book, This Is It. And like, Alan Watts, okay, Bruce like Alan Watts, and of course I've been studying, I got my minor in my undergrad had been philosophy. So I'd already started studying some Eastern ideas. So I started thumbing through the book. And at that point, I knew the Bruce Lee writings up and down. And lo and behold, I found passages, just like Edwin Hazlitt, you mentioned, like I recount, or Joe Snyder in my book, finding passages that he thought were familiar and recognizing them as Edwin Hazlitt.
He saw Hazlitt's book.
Yeah, I immediately recognized these are passages from Bruce Lee's writings, and I knew exactly where they were coming from. It was that story about Bruce reaching the impasse in his
water.
Yip Man, and then he goes out on the boat, he punches the water, has a spiritual epiphany. A huge chunk of that story was taken verbatim from This Is It. And so it was a revelation to me. And I thought, well, you know what? This book was published 1 year before he came to America. If Watts said this first, not only does that mean Bruce Lee was plagiarizing, because this was a college essay, but it also means this story that we've all accepted as one of those seminal stories in his history was fake.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I mean to interrupt you, but when the first time I heard that story, I said to myself, this doesn't sound like the character of Yip Man to me. When he said, according to the story, too long, go and take some time off and meditate on it or whatever. I said, that doesn't sound like something that Yip Man would say to him, It sounds like something you would see in Kung Fu or something like that, But not from a person like Yip Man would tell him, take some time off and go and meditate on the subject or whatever. It just didn't. I mean, that was my first reaction when I heard the story, but I didn't know that it was from Alan Watts until later on that you published it in your book.
So that set me on the path of taking a critical look at everything that had been attributed to Bruce Lee. And of course, in my book, Dynamic Becoming, I put those findings in there and a few hundred examples of things that were misattributed to him. Earlier this year, I'm on social media and I'm seeing misattributed quotes for the umpteenth time. And I said, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm going to do something about it. And so I started this research project, which wasn't just about the Tao. In fact, initially I was doing it just because I was interested in finding the sources of the philosophical quotes. But as I got into it, I realized as I started amassing this huge collection of data that probably I should focus on the Tao of Jeet Kune first, and produce a piece of scholarship on that.
Now that's my next question, James. So when did you actually really start to put this book together?
Well, I started the research project in April.
Oh, okay. Of this year.
Of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was like a 5-month process, wasn't it?
It was. I collected all the data in about 4 months.
Okay.
So it took. I have probably a couple thousand misattributed quotes already identified. The Tao of Jeet Kune represents about half of that.
Now, did you hear of Joe Snyder before that, or during the process that you were gathering all that information?
I think I'd heard of him, something vague before then.
Okay.
But I really didn't know the guy until I started researching him for the book.
And for those people that don't know who Joe Snyder is, he actually was one of the first people to recognize the material in the Tao was coming from sources from Bruce Lee's library.
He probably was the first.
Yes.
Because he recognized it in October 1975, the day he got the book.
And he sent me a letter with all his photocopies, of his books in the Tao. He said, you see, and that was.
And there's a sample of that in the book. I mean, you sent me images of it, and that would have been the same stuff that he sent to Linda and O'Hara publication.
Right. Some of those things do appear in your book because I sent you a copy of it. But that was the first time that I ever heard the Tao of Jeet Kune was coming from sources from Bruce Lee's library. When he sent me a whole package, basically of an envelope, and it was all at that time, Xerox copies of the books, and because there was no computers back then. And when I read all that, I said, "Wow, this is something to start looking at." And that's when I started building up my library, looking for all the, I guess, like you did also. It was a hit or miss thing. We would look at a boxing book and say, "Okay, this was published in 1960. Most likely Bruce Lee had this book. Let me go and buy it." So it was pretty costly to do it that way, but with a hit and miss thing. But most of the time, when I would get the book, I would say, "Wow, there is something in this book from the Tao."
Now, James, how did Sifu Richard Torres get into this project with you?
Well, it wasn't conscious. I just, I started doing this, and I mentioned it to him, and the next thing he was. First of all, he was encouraging me to move forward with the project, but he was also providing himself as a resource. So he was very helpful in the early stages of this book.
So how many books were used, or how many books did you guys reference? In
addition to this, another thing that I've been researching over the years are the books that Bruce Lee owned. There is an official list somewhere. I know a few people who were in possession of it. Jerry Petit being one of them.
Interesting. Jerry Petit. Okay.
Yeah, Jerry Petit had a copy of it at one point. But they all told me the same thing, that Linda had forbid them from making it public. So there's never been a public list of the books in Bruce Lee's library. And so when I was doing Dynamic Becoming, I started a process of researching to identify books. And a lot of that research was looking at the photographs of his library and sort of, taking the microscope to them and identifying the books on the shelf. And I amassed a list of about close to 1,200 right now. Wow, books that I know Bruce Lee possessed. And there were other methods too, references to other books that maybe some of the students have made, things but a lot of it was identification through images. So taking that list, 1,200 books that I had a place to look. So I started getting those books and scanning them, digitizing them, and creating this giant database from which I would do searches on passages, quotes, and there was an art to it. I couldn't necessarily do the entire quote as a search. I found what worked better was if I did little bits, because Bruce may have changed a word here or there,
Right.
which he often did. So it would, it would thwart the search effort if I used the entire quote. So I would use little bits and see what would hit.
Now, James, what was the best part of putting this book together?
The best part, just the discovery, the process of discovery. I lost sleep because I just could not put the effort down.
Right.
It was just, it fascinated me.
Oh yeah.
And I loved doing the work.
It's like discovering treasure, right?
Like discovering treasure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the list that you have in Dynamic Becoming has increased, because I think what you had, 1,200 books of Bruce Lee's library at that time, 1,200.
Well, Dynamic Becoming, no, I only had about somewhere between 300 and 400.
Oh, you have a whole lot more now.
I have a whole lot more now.
And I sent you pictures from the museum also that had a Bruce Lee's library, and from there you picked up.
So you went to the Wing Museum debut of the Bruce Lee exhibit, and you sent me pictures because they had some of the books on display, and I was able to get about 50 more titles out of those pictures.
Now, so what was the worst part of putting this book together?
The worst part? Oh, I don't know if there is a worst part. I tell you the most challenging part.
Okay.
The most challenging part was putting together the story of Joe Snyder, because he had just disappeared off the face of the earth. He was the only person I could not source a photograph of, nor was I able to identify any of his surviving family to reach out to. So I had to piece together his life story based on the articles that he published during the late 70s and 80s in martial art magazines, plus genealogical records, newspaper records.
And he passed away, in case anyone.
I think like 2004, right? 2004.
Yeah, the early 2000s. Yeah.
Right.
And I was looking for him again after we corresponded years later. I should have stayed in contact with him, but of course, you lose contact with people. I said, with the miracle of computers, I thought maybe I could find him, but no luck.
Joe Snyder, he made these discoveries about Bruce Lee's, about the Tao of Jeet Kune, and he sent these discoveries to Linda and to Ahara Publications. And Adrian Marshall reached out to him, and they were very welcoming to his research, and they added the little acknowledgement that you normally see in the front of the Tao of Jeet Kune, which with the new edition, they have conspicuously put that in the very back of the book, which I'm a little critical of, but acknowledging those other writers. But he continued doing research, and he found even more. It started to mount. And then when he went back to try to contact the estate the second time, they didn't want to hear from him anymore. And you can see over the course of, he wrote probably a half dozen articles for martial art magazines about this work, various things. Like he wrote one for a fencing magazine talking about the fencing influence. And he wrote some others for the martial art magazines. But you could see his growing discontentment as he found more, until at a certain point, he acknowledged in one of his later articles that, that he regret the book was ever published to begin with. But he had a book that he had completed, and that had a major publisher. He named the publisher that had
and the title.
And the title, yes.
Yeah, the sources of Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune.
And it was imminently to be published, and then he and the book just disappeared. Disappeared, never to be heard from again. The book never saw the light of day, and he never wrote another thing about Bruce Lee.
Who knows what happened if they asked him?
Who knows?
Paid him, whatever.
I'm sure we've all got our suspicions, but
yes.
James, what was your favorite quote from the Tao before you realized that it was written by someone else?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer to that. I've never thought of distilling it down to just one quote.
Okay, what about the quotes that you were surprised? I'm like, oh, I guess Bruce didn't write this. Like, which author did you feel like, oh, this was this wasn't written by Bruce, and I'm surprised that this person wrote it.
Nothing surprises me at this point. So when I went into this project, I assumed that probably virtually everything in there, and I've pretty much proven that right, was not written by Bruce Lee. And part of this process too, it wasn't just to identify the misattributions. One of my goals too was to narrow down what is authentically Bruce Lee. Things that I could comfortably tell people, you can quote this and say it's Bruce. So there are some things in there. They're not in my book because they're actually Bruce. I think they're Bruce Lee's words that are in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do.
So can you tell us what quote or what passage was really actually Bruce Lee's?
You give me a second, I'll pull up my handy dandy spreadsheet, and I can give you a few of those.
Well, the 5 ways of attack is actually Bruce all the way, isn't it? Except for using the fencing.
As far as I could tell, I could not find any evidence that he took it from anywhere else.
And you know what's interesting too, since Bruce was talking about Jeet Kune Do in development that was boxing and fencing, was there any type of Wing Chun in any of those passages or any information that you went over with? Because I just realized that, wait, I haven't seen any type of Wing Chun type of notes. No,
I haven't found any. Now, some of that is in Chinese. I was able to identify some of the Chinese stuff, its origins, but others I could not. And one of the reasons for that is I haven't been able to identify. I've identified some of the Chinese books, but there's so many that I can't identify. And if I don't know where to look,
right,
I can't find that stuff. But yeah, so I haven't found anything that's Wing Chun in.
Well, it's important. Yeah, it's important to know that there's no Wing Chun books also at that time.
True. And remember, this was Bruce researching things he didn't know about.
Right.
So he had a firm base on Wing Chun that he didn't need to write notes about it. Yeah. That was already internalized for him. So it makes sense that you wouldn't find much on Wing Chun. It doesn't mean that it wasn't an important aspect of his martial art. He was looking for things outside of what he already had.
Some people like to use that as an argument that the Tao doesn't contain a lot of Wing Chun in there.
Well, it doesn't, but that doesn't mean Jeet Kune Do doesn't have a heavy Wing Chun influence. Yeah.
And there is trapping mentioned in the Tao a few times.
So did you find any type of quotes actually originally from Bruce Lee?
Yeah, there's one. Art is really the expression of the self. The more complicated and restricted the method, the less opportunity for the expression of one's original sense of freedom. That's from, that's Striking Thoughts. I'm sorry. Okay, well, that one I think is probably legitimately Bruce Lee.
Okay. What made you put in the biography in the book from other authors and other influences that Bruce was drawing?
To add the biographies that I did in the book?
Yeah.
Well, because I had identified 85% of the book, so that meant in the way I wanted to lay out the book, I thought the best way for the reader to recognize what I had produced was to be able to put the book side by side with the same pagination, so that if you're looking at page 100 of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, you look on page 100 of my book and it's keeping together in that sense. But to do that meant I've got to leave a lot of gaps in the pages, like 15% worth.
Wow.
So I said, well, what am I going to fill those gaps with? What should I put in here? The biographies, I immediately thought that's a good idea. So I started work on that. But there's other things like historical documents, the old ads, things like that, used to fill it. But yeah, that was the point of that, to fill that empty space with something of value to the reader that is applicable to the Tao of Jeet Kune Do.
A lot of that trivia and biographies are worth reading. I tell my students, read that first before you start reading the whole book, and then read the book like if you were reading the Tao, because it's really good stuff that you put in there. And I think we put some of the stuff with how the Tao evolved from the beginning 1975 version to the expanded edition that exists now in 2023, 22 now, right? Yeah, there's a lot of good material in that, in all those little boxes from your book there, James.
Sifu, I'll pose this question to you. What was the first thing that you helped out James with this book?
That's a good question. I don't remember. I remember us talking about the book. I think I sent him certain things and asked him, do you know about this or do you know about that? And he said, oh, that one escaped me. And he added it to the book. It's funny that James would send me messages, like I said, midnight, my time, and say, do you have this book? Can you scan page so and so and so and so for me?
Yes.
And I said, all right, I'll go downstairs and do it. At 1 o'clock in the morning, scanning pages for James.
Now, James, I know you're looking, but let me pose this question to you. What was the most valuable information that Sifu Richard Torres gave you for your book?
Oh, boy. Probably the most valuable when he was able to provide scans of things that I was unable to procure on my own. Such as there was one, I remember distinctly, there was one booklet that he was, you know which one I'm talking about, Richard?
Yes.
Yeah, I would never have been able to source that.
Book. Yeah, what was that? Who was that? I forgot his name.
So this was a boxing pamphlet. Some of the images Bruce copied for Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Pretty much impossible. Jowlet, I think was his name.
Yes, that's exactly
Jowlet,
right.
yeah. And it's impossible to source a copy of this thing, but unfortunately Richard had it. And that was a case where Richard, I would never have known that there was a contribution there had Richard not known about it. He said, hey, there's this pamphlet that Bruce took from. I talked about my process and how I would digitize these things and scan them and then do a word search. I couldn't do that with images. So the images I identified the old-fashioned way, which was to look in books and to recognize that, hey, this photograph is what Bruce traced to get this particular image.
I heard that Alex Richter interviewed you a few days ago. I remember him texting me an image that was from the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. It was a Muay diagram.
Yes.
I don't know if it's in your book, but did he tell you something about that?
Yeah, it's a series of photographs that appear in Draeger's book. Photographs of Muay Thai. So the Muay Thai you see in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do was taken directly from Draeger's book. Yeah.
And it's important to understand that Draeger also wrote that Thai boxing was a John O'Sullivan of kicking, which Bruce Lee used to use himself. He actually used to repeat that statement a lot. So
let me go back to my question, James. Why come out with this book now?
Because I want to set the record straight about these quotes. I'm tired of them being misused. I'm tired of Bruce Lee being given credit for a lot of other people's work. It's unfair to them. And I think it's unfair to the people that are quoting Bruce.
Which quote that you always been hearing from a lot of people saying that is from Bruce, that you feel that, okay, this is not the quote? Like, which quote would that be if you heard it from someone?
Well, one of them that I kind of featured in Dynamic Becoming was that knowing is not enough quote. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Which I was able to identify was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, a German philosopher who said that. And so that was one of the big.
Yeah, it was all over posters, T-shirts.
Yeah,
with Bruce's
and you don't see it too much now because I think I got enough of the word out on that quote. But back in 2002, 2004, around the time I produced that book, that was probably the number one quote attributed to Bruce Lee. And now you hardly see it mentioned unless it's being recycled on the internet.
So which author surprised you the most Bruce drew inspiration from while doing this project?
Well, there's one source that I just wasn't ready to call it, but there's a passage in Tao of Jeet Kune Do about take the stairs instead of the elevator, walk around the block or something like that. That passage?
Yeah.
The closest, and I found a very close match to it, but it wasn't close enough for me. But it was from a good housekeeping book on stay-at-home homemakers for women. Yeah. But it deviated enough. Like only half of it was pretty much verbatim, but the other part was different, and I just couldn't pull the trigger on calling that a match.
It's like you learn something, and you don't have to write it down exactly the way you read it or whatever. You just how many things do people copy from us on Facebook, and
That's right.
And I say, hey, that's from me, but I mean, there's some that actually copy it 100%.
And let's, that's another subject too. When you do scholarship and someone steals the scholarship and passes it off as their own or doesn't give you appropriate credit for it. And that's a big enough problem that Bruce was doing that. But now we've got, his fans and his students that have a tendency to do that too. And that's primarily the reason I stopped writing about Bruce for 14 years, was because my stuff was being taken not only without credit, but other people were taking credit for it.
Like your list, your library list.
Yeah, like my library list. Yeah, someone slapped it up on the internet. This website, House of Bruce Lee, and they're saying, "Oh, this is the research I did and the lists I compiled."
Oh,
and
wow.
No, you did not. You took it straight from my book, and you added a few things to it. You got a few things wrong in the adding as well, which I'm not going to tell you what they are. I walked away from writing about Bruce Lee for 14 years because this is one of the points that I'm trying to make. When you steal someone's intellectual work, you take away the motivation for that person to continue producing things.
Mm.
Right?
Right.
If you're going to take it and take credit for it, then I'm not going to produce it. And that's why plagiarism is wrong. And that's why intellectual property needs to be preserved and protected.
Now, besides that list, James, which quote or which writings that you wrote and other people has been posting it as their own?
Some of my articles, it's been almost 20 years, but some of my articles were being posted without my permission.
Now, I think you mentioned that you might have more additions to the Who Wrote the Tao. Are you almost in the process of finishing it, or are you still in the process? So what's the deal with
No, that'll be maybe next year. I'm pretty busy right now. I'm trying to prep the paperback edition of the book, which will come out in January. And then I have a psychology book I have to write for a publisher that has a mid-December deadline. So that's as soon as I get this paperback ready for press, then I have to go about finishing that other book.
Now, would that be just like the second edition of what you have now, or are you going to have like another separate type of book?
Or you mean a revised edition?
Yeah, like either a revised edition or maybe like Who Wrote the Tao Part 2 or something like that.
I think there will be a revised edition somewhere down the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
But aren't you writing a book on the philosophy though? Isn't that the next one?
Well, I see 3 books coming out of this. The Tao of Jeet Kune book, at least 3.
Right.
A book on his philosophical influences,
right,
as a product of this research. And then I think I will produce a book of quotations, which I'm flirting around with names for it. One of them is the Little Dragon's Book of Favorite Quotations.
Oh.
The other title is Somebody Else's Striking Thoughts.
How about
That's
unquote quote?
Besides Sifu Richard Torres, which Bruce Lee historians do you feel that is most accurate with their discoveries of Bruce Lee?
Well, first of all, I would like to say, because someone referred to me as historian, I don't consider myself a Bruce Lee historian. Okay. I'm a scholar, and I'm a scholar in a particular area, which is the philosophy and the writing. I don't preoccupy myself with the details of his life. That's not my interest. If we're talking unpublished historians, then hands down, it's Richard Torres, right? And I've been pushing him to do a book. And I actually
we all have been.
There it is.
In fact, I listened to your first podcast the two of you produced, and listened to him talking about the timeline. And it occurred to me that that's the way he needs to do his book, a timeline of Bruce Lee.
Yes.
That would distinguish it from the other books that have been done. Now, as far as the other historians, in terms of biography, I think Matt Pauly's biography is the best one that's been done to date.
Right.
But I don't consider it perfect.
I think there's one particular, I've heard that one particular area in the book wasn't really accurate, but he put it in there anyway. But that is
correct. That's correct. He, when I got the book and I read, I went looking for certain things that I knew.
Right.
Like I was saying, I hope to God this poor guy didn't quote Bruce Lee. And I think to his credit, he avoided that as much as possible.
Right.
You know, and that, because that's my concern. Someone, I've seen academic journals quoting Bruce Lee. These are professors that they're unintentionally embarrassing themselves because Bruce Lee didn't say that.
Right.
Someone else did.
Right.
So to Polly's credit, I think he knew, he had seen my work. He told me he had read my book, and he kind of avoided that mess. But he did publish as truth that story about Bruce reaching that impasse in his training with Yip Man and going out on the lake. And so I contacted him and I said, I introduced myself. I said, I've written about this in my book, which, he replied and said, yes, I read your book. I just wanted to make him aware that the thing wasn't true, that it had, so much of it had been plagiarized that it simply could not have happened. And his response to me was, yes, I was aware of that. I read that, but it was such a good story. I figured something like that must have happened. So I included it anyway. And that bothers me. He's purporting to say that it's that everything in his book, he's done and it's, my evidence is irrefutable. It's verbatim out of Alan Watts's book. Key words, key events in this story.
We're talking about a Yip Man.
Slapping the water.
Pretty much everything Yip Man said to Bruce is taken out of Alan Watts. The bird flying overhead, taken from Alan Watts.
Yes.
So much of that story was taken from Alan Watts that there's no way it could have happened.
It's that Bruce Lee wrote that for a college paper.
College paper,
Maybe he figured the professor wouldn't recognize that was Alan Watts, especially since
the professor suspected that he was plagiarizing.
Couldn't prove
if you
it.
read Linda's book, Bruce Lee, The Man Only I Knew, she writes in there how his professor accused him of plagiarism but couldn't prove it. She interviewed the professor and quoted the professor on that.
Wow.
And the way Bruce Lee hid that was by putting himself as a student and Yip Man as the teacher, and all this happening to him, not in third person as Alan Watts himself.
So Polly published this, and that concerns me because if he made that creative choice, it's not a historical choice; it's a creative choice. What other creative choices did he make? And Polly, I saw some reference. I think he was interviewed, and someone brought it up to him. And he somewhat acknowledged it. He said that I had frequently emailed him about it. No, we had one email conversation. If frequently emailed means I emailed him once, he emailed me back, I emailed him again, he emailed me back, and I emailed him again. If that counts as frequent, okay. But it's not like I was hounding this guy. We had one conversation about this stuff. That's the one criticism I could give to his book. Other than that, I think it's the best produced biography that's ever been done on Bruce. Yeah, hands down.
Now, Sifu, you said you had something to ask James.
Oh, me teaching martial arts, JKD especially, I always quoted Bruce Lee writing, "The mastery of the proper fundamentals and the progressive application is the secret of being a great fighter." Now, this is something I quoted Bruce Lee all the time in regards to Jeet Kune. And I asked you, James.
What's the quote again?
I'm crossing my fingers saying, no, you already told me the source.
I already told you the source? Oh, okay.
It's Boxing Simplified by Kennedy.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm always teaching my students, that's such a fantastic quote, In fact, I even told Sifu Ted that. I said, Sifu Ted, look what it writes, what it says here in this Tao. And he says, that's it right there, that in a nutshell. And then when I asked you, does this have an origin somewhere? And you said, Richard, yes, it does. And you told me. So of course I went to my library because I don't remember reading it in my library. And of course it was in the introduction of Kennedy's book here.
Yes.
And
if I remember correctly, it's hard to, when I put that information in there, they didn't paginate the introduction, did they? If I remember that correctly.
No.
So I kind of had to guesstimate the page number for this.
You just put a 2 on Roman number 2 or something.
Yeah, the Roman numbers. Yeah.
And it said, and here to quote the book, says the mastery of these fundamentals and their progressive application is the secret of learning boxing.
Mhm.
So it's amazing how Bruce can get all these little puzzles and create a fantastic martial arts system. Like
So what's that quote again?
from Kennedy?
No, from
From the way Bruce
Tao.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The mastery of the proper fundamentals and the progressive application is the secret of being a great fighter.
Now, see, if I had looked for that in my database, just like that, it would have gave me nothing. Okay. But what I did is I looked at pairings of words. So was that progressive fundamentals or what was it? Say it again. There's a couple of points in there where there are two words together that are pretty distinctive when they're put together.
Well, Bruce Lee wrote proper fundamentals. He just wrote fundamentals.
Okay. You know, it became an art. I kind of figured out how to do this. I would have ran those two words together and just see what it would kick back for me in all the digitized books that I had.
And then when he wrote Secret of Being a Great Fighter, where in the book it says Secret of Being a Boxer, the secret of learning, he said after progressive application, he put is a secret of learning boxing. Mm-hmm. Like if there's a secret of learning boxing, right? The progressive application, which we know strategy and tactics and so forth. And then,
but there was a lot of that, as you know, a lot of changing left to right and fighter, or you know, words like boxer or fencer to fighter. Yeah, there was plenty of that in there.
Another quote that I always quoted to my students was the straight lead is the backbone of Jeet Kune. And in your book, it says the straight left is generally considered the backbone of boxing. So here we, you know, for how many years have I been saying, you know, the straight lead is the backbone of Jeet Kune, and then we find out that it comes from Philadelphia Jack O'Brien.
Well, you know what, Vincent, that was one you talked about, or any that surprised me. Mm-hmm. The Philadelphia Jack O'Brien came out of nowhere. A lot of stuff came from that Philadelphia Jack O'Brien book, and his name I had not been familiar with attached to Bruce Lee at that point. I don't know if anyone else was aware of that at the time. Yeah. My book may be the first time that connection's been made.
So, James, what didn't make it into the book?
Okay, so I found things since the book went to press. Mm-hmm. So there are some things already that I know, and at least one other person has brought a few other things to my attention as well. So I say this book's about 85%. Now it's probably about 80, 87, probably, maybe. Right. Including a boxing book that isn't mentioned in my book at all, but I now know is thanks to a Jeet Kune Do practitioner in the UK named Alan Davies, who brought to my attention a few more things. Which in further editions, I'll add those to it. Right. So yeah, there's you know, even as I was laying out the book, I was finding things.
Anyone besides Sifu Richard Torres that helped you with this book?
To a much lesser degree, Chris Kent provided me some material about Gilbert Johnson, who was a friend, who had been a friend of his. Right. Including the photograph that appears in the book. Carl Fox actually gave me the idea for the title and the overall design of the front cover. He did a mock-up using the actual picture of Bruce Lee on the cover of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Right. Because Carl Fox has some really good graphic design intuitions. So I said, you know, just think about it for me and come up with an idea. So he came up with this idea. I couldn't use the image, obviously, from the cover of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. No. I actually created that image. That image doesn't exist. That was digitally created.
Now I see some words in here. That looks really interesting.
Yeah, that was Carl Fox's idea, to work into the shadows of the image text from the Tao of Jeet Kune Do.
Right. Few people realize that unless they actually look at it really close and they can see.
So he gave me I was just going to call it the literary source book for the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. He tacked on the Who Wrote the Tao, which when he did that, I thought, you know what, that's a great. I'm gonna keep that as the full title.
Okay, James. Before we go, the Passionate Mind Institute. Tell me about that.
The Passionate Mind Institute is my 501c3 nonprofit that I set up after I finished my doctorate. I made a decision not to go into becoming a professor teaching at a university, because I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. So I have my own business.
Nice.
So it didn't behoove me to do that. But I still wanted a base from which to conduct research. I'm a researcher. So I set up this nonprofit primarily for that purpose, but also for other creative reasons as well that I can funnel through the nonprofit. Like I did a couple years ago, I was supposed to go to Dublin, Ireland. I was invited to speak about Bruce Lee at a university there, and the pandemic hit. It was 2020,
Right.
And so I wasn't able to go. And I was going to go there to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of mine and John Little and Andy Kimura's original trip to Ireland to lecture on Bruce Lee's philosophy.
Right.
Since I wasn't able to go, I got the idea we had recorded with our home video cameras just about everything. So I got the idea to produce a documentary of that event 20 years prior, which I did through the auspices of my nonprofit. And that documentary, Building the Bridge, the 2000 philosophy lectures in Ireland, Bruce Lee philosophy lectures in Ireland, we released on YouTube for everybody to see for free. So
Now, speaking of videos, you recently just posted something about Who Wrote the Tao. Are those going to be a series of videos about your book, or you have a project of videos coming out concerning of Who Wrote the Tao?
Yes and no. Yeah, those are videos to promote my book. I might do one more specifically like that. But I am planning several more videos on Bruce Lee related subjects.
Nice.
A controversy, as we call it.
Some of it's controversial, of course, I did that. My weighing in and giving my opinion on the original versus concept debate.
Can I ask you a question in regards to that?
Yeah.
We have people now that are throwing this using no way as way, having no limitation as limitation as an invitation to just study
whatever
everything's out there, because Bruce Lee said using no way as way, having no limitation as no limitation. What is your idea on that?
My idea on that is that Bruce was speaking specifically about his personal journey through the martial arts, right? And he was talking about being unbound by traditional martial arts in that sense. But Bruce did have a specific, he and people today call it a system, but that's just semantics. It could also be a style, though we don't like to use the term style. He had a very clear vision in his mind of what was Jeet Kune Do and what was not Jeet Kune Do.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm not an advocate, as I pointed out in my video. I'm not an advocate of adding things, tacking things on to the title of Jeet Kune Do, because Bruce Lee is no longer here to say one way or the other whether he would accept that as Jeet Kune Do. So my advocacy is that continued growth is great, and I believe in that. But you grow beyond the name if that's the case. You don't call it Jeet Kune Do anymore. It's your thing, and you give it your own title for it.
You just mentioned that you did martial arts. What was there any other martial arts that you studied besides? You said karate, correct?
Yeah, I studied Shotokan the most.
Okay.
And then I studied at various points judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, a summer of Aikido, and then, of course, the school I went to was a concept school, so Kali was there was there, but they were very clear. This is Kali,
right.
This is not Jeet Kune Do, this is Kali. And my instructors were students under Tim Tackett.
Oh.
And then, at the end, I studied Jeet Kune Do for less than 2 years.
So who was your instructor in Jeet Kune?
It was two instructors, James Roberts and Willie Wilson, here in Dallas. James Roberts, I don't think he's an instructor anymore. After I left the school, I think a year or two after that, he stopped practicing martial arts too, I think. But Willie Wilson still runs the school.
Well, you're always welcome to Sifu School in Fishkill, New York, to train with us.
Come on down. Actually, we're having a summer camp in August 14th to the 21st, a week in 2023, next year. And it's going to be in Poland. So, hey, you're welcome to come. Bring your wife if you want.
To come to Poland? Yeah.
And then
I heard it's beautiful.
Take another trip around the neighboring countries there. They're really nice. You know, Europe is beautiful. But yeah, if you want to, you know, we're going to have an open invitation to a lot of people to come down to that camp.
Well, I've got to get up there at some point to see your collection. I mean, that goes without saying. Yeah.
It's a museum down there. So it's a whole new world down there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, great. Guys, thank you for doing this, James. Thank you for being a great guest. A lot of information. Okay, guys.
Who wrote the Tao.com is the website where you can order it. It's limited to 500 copies. The hardback, the paperback comes out next year.
And all the paperback will be available in Amazon, the paperback?
Yeah, it'll be in all the regular channels. Yeah.
Great. So is there anybody you want to acknowledge, James, before we go for this book?
Just thank Richard for all his help.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay, great. Thank you, James, and thank you, Sifu, for doing this. Hopefully we'll do this again if or whenever James does his revised book. All right. Okay, you guys have a good one.